from Richard Burton's secret hatred of his co-star to Elizabeth Taylor's $46 jealousy cameo. This Tudor epic hides bizarre behind-the-scenes drama, cursed production delays, and historical filming mishaps that rival any royal scandal. The tension on set was so thick it could have beheaded more than just Anne Boleyn. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Anne of the Thousand Days. Fact 1. Censored for 2 decades. Anne of the Thousand Days had one of the longest waits in Hollywood history between stage and screen, and the reason had nothing to do with money or star power. When Maxwell Anderson's play opened on Broadway in December of 1948, it was an immediate hit, with Rex Harrison winning a Tony Award for his performance as King Henry VIII. The production ran for 288 performances, and movie studios immediately recognized its potential as a major motion picture. However, there was one massive problem standing in the way, and that problem was the Motion Picture Production Code, also known as the Hays Code. This strict set of censorship rules governed what could and could not be shown in American films, and Anne of the Thousand Days violated several of its most serious taboos. The story's central themes included adultery, as Henry pursued Anne while still married to Catherine of Aragon, illegitimacy, since their daughter Elizabeth was considered illegitimate by many, and perhaps most shocking of all, incest, as Anne was falsely accused of having an affair with her own brother. These subjects were absolutely forbidden under the production code, which meant no major studio would touch the material no matter how successful the play had been. For 2 full decades, the play sat on the shelf while Hollywood waited for the moral climate to change. It wasn't until the mid-1960s that the old censorship system began to collapse, weakened by foreign films that dealt with mature themes and by changing social attitudes in America. The final blow came in 1966 when Mike Nichols, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, pushed the boundaries so far that the code essentially died. Only then could producer Hal Wallace finally bring Anne of the Thousand Days to the screen in 1969, more than 20 years after audiences first saw it on stage. Fact 2. Elizabeth Taylor's $46 spy mission. Elizabeth Taylor made one of the strangest cameo appearances in film history during the production of Anne of the Thousand Days, and her reasons had nothing to do with wanting to be in the movie. Taylor's husband, Richard Burton, was playing King Henry VIII opposite a young French-Canadian actress named Genevieve Bujold, who was 27 years old and relatively unknown in Hollywood at the time. Burton had a well-known reputation for becoming romantically involved with his younger co-stars, and Taylor was deeply suspicious that history might repeat itself during the lengthy filming schedule. Rather than stay home and worry, Taylor decided to take matters into her own hands by accepting a tiny, uncredited role as a masked courtesan in one brief scene. The studio paid her exactly $46 for the appearance, which was almost insulting considering she was one of the biggest movie stars in the world, but money was never the point of her participation. What Taylor really wanted was an excuse to be on set every single day of production, watching her husband's interactions with Bujold like a hawk. She didn't just show up for her own scene and leave. She made herself a constant presence throughout the entire shoot, observing from the sidelines and making sure everyone knew she was there. The arrangement created an incredibly tense atmosphere on set, with Taylor holding court at one end of the room during cast parties, while Bujold stayed at the opposite end. Burton, caught in the middle of this awkward situation, made a point of never leaving his wife's side during social gatherings. Whether or not Taylor's suspicions were justified remains a matter of debate, but her $46 insurance policy certainly kept everyone on their best behavior throughout the production. Fact 3. I'm going to give that bitch an acting lesson. The most dramatic moment of the entire production happened on the day they filmed Anne Boleyn's final confrontation with King Henry in the Tower of London, and it had nothing to do with the script. Genevieve Bujold arrived on set that morning, ready to film one of the movie's most emotionally demanding scenes, where Anne faces her husband for the last time before her execution. Then she learned that Elizabeth Taylor had decided to show up specifically to watch this particular scene being filmed, which immediately told Bejeweled exactly what Taylor was thinking. According to producer Hal Wallace, who witnessed the entire incident, Bejeweled was absolutely furious when she found out Taylor was there. She turned to director Charles Jarrett and said, quote, "I'm going to give that bitch an acting lesson she'll never forget," then took her position in front of the camera without another word. What happened next became one of those legendary moments that people in the film industry still talk about decades later. Bejeweled threw herself into the scene with such raw intensity and emotional power that everyone watching was completely stunned, including Wallace, who later said he had seldom seen acting skill of that level in his entire career. The scene where Anne delivers her final speech to Henry, telling him that their daughter Elizabeth will become a greater queen than any king he could have produced, crackles with an energy that goes beyond mere acting technique. Bejeweled channeled all her anger and frustration about Taylor's presence into her performance, and the result is absolutely electric. The moment the director called cut, Bejeweled immediately stormed off the set without speaking to anyone, leaving the cast and crew in complete silence. Fact 4. Burton secretly despised his co-star. Richard Burton maintained a professional demeanor during filming, but his private diaries told a completely different story about what he really thought of Genevieve Bejeweled. These diaries were published roughly 30 years after his death, and they revealed that Burton had nothing but contempt for his young co-star throughout the entire production. He gave her the nickname Gin, claiming that she frequently showed up to set hungover and smelling of alcohol, which was particularly ironic coming from Burton, who was notorious for his own heavy drinking throughout his career. Burton's written comments about Bejeweled's acting ability were even harsher than his complaints about her personal habits. He described her as pretentious and untalented, writing that she had all the power of a dying gnat and completely lacked the spit, venom, and arrogance that the role of Anne Boleyn required. He also suggested that his wife Elizabeth Taylor would have been far better in the part, and claimed that nearly everyone on the production found Bejeweled difficult to work with, calling her vulgar and rubbish in his private notes. Burton even went so far as to say he hated both the movie and his own performance in it, and was genuinely shocked when he received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. The ultimate irony of Burton's bitter assessment came when the Oscar nominations were announced. Bejeweled received a nomination for Best Actress and became the only actress in history ever nominated for an Academy Award for playing Anne Boleyn. Burton was also nominated for Best Actor, marking his 6th Oscar nomination, but he lost to John Wayne for True Grit and never won an Oscar in his entire career. Fact 5. The platform that killed twice. Movie productions are famous for recycling props and set pieces to save money, but Anne of the Thousand Days took this practice to a particularly dark place with its execution scaffold. The film depicts 2 major beheadings during its runtime, first showing the execution of Sir Thomas More, the brilliant statesman who refused to acknowledge King Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn, and later showing Anne's own execution at the Tower of London. Both scenes feature a somber black wooden platform where the condemned characters meet their fate, and attentive viewers who look closely at both platforms will notice something unusual about them. The production didn't build 2 separate execution stages for these scenes. They simply reused the exact same platform for both deaths, which creates an unintentionally eerie connection between the 2 executions. Sharp-eyed movie fans have pointed out specific details that prove both scenes used identical construction, including a distinctive darker wood knot visible on one of the crosspieces of the platform. This same knot appears in both Thomas More's execution scene and Anne Boleyn's final moments, making it clear that the production team simply moved the same piece of scenery from one location to another and filmed it again. While this kind of prop recycling is completely standard practice in Hollywood and makes perfect sense from a budget perspective, there's something grimly appropriate about using the same death platform for both characters. In the story, Thomas More dies partly because of his opposition to Anne's queenship, and Anne herself dies just a few years later, both of them victims of King Henry's increasingly tyrannical rule. The recycled scaffold becomes an accidental symbol of how the king's court had essentially become a killing machine during this period of English history. Fact 6. Olivia Hussey talked herself out of stardom. Genevieve Bujold wasn't actually the first choice to play Anne Boleyn, and the story of how she got the role involves one of the most costly verbal blunders in Hollywood history. Producer Hal Wallace had initially set his sights on British actress Olivia Hussey, who seemed perfect for the part with her angular features, large expressive eyes, and long, thick, dark brown hair that matched the historical descriptions of Anne Boleyn. Wallace first met Hussey in New York in November of 1967 at a party celebrating her upcoming film, Romeo and Juliet, which would be released the following year. During their conversation, Wallace offered Hussey not just one role, but two major opportunities. He wanted her to star as Anne Boleyn in Anne of the Thousand Days, and he also offered her a part in True Grit alongside John Wayne, which he was producing at the same time. For a young actress on the verge of stardom, these were incredible offers that could have launched her into the top tier of Hollywood leading ladies. However, Hussey was young and nervous, and she made a comment that instantly destroyed both opportunities. According to Hussey's own account in her 2019 memoir, she mumbled something about being interested in Anne of the Thousand Days, but then added that she couldn't really see herself working with John Wayne. She later described her remark as adolescent and opinionated, admitting that it had taken her less than a minute to completely talk her way out of both films. Wallace was so offended by her dismissive attitude toward one of Hollywood's biggest stars that he immediately withdrew both offers and ended their professional relationship on the spot. Fact 7. Burton told Liz she was too long in the tooth producer. Hal Wallace found himself in an extremely awkward situation during a lavish lunch meeting on the set of The Taming of the Shrew in 1967, where he was discussing the Anne of the Thousand Days project with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. Burton had already agreed to play King Henry VIII, and Wallace was excited about the production, but he had no intention of casting Taylor in the film. The conversation was going smoothly until Taylor, who had been thinking about the project for weeks, suddenly announced that she absolutely had to play Anne Boleyn. Wallace later described the moment in his memoirs as completely horrifying, because the historical Anne Boleyn was supposed to be a young slip of a girl, barely 18 years old when King Henry first pursued her. Taylor was 37 years old at the time, and Wallace wrote that she had become plump and middle-aged, making her completely wrong for the part. However, telling one of the biggest movie stars in the world that she was too old for a role, especially when her husband was sitting right there at the table, was not a conversation Wallace wanted to have. Before Wallace could figure out how to handle this impossible situation, Richard Burton came to his rescue in the most direct way possible. Burton simply put his hand on Taylor's hand, looked her straight in the eye, and said, quote, "Sorry, love, you're too long in the tooth," end quote. According to Wallace, Taylor took the rejection like a trooper, and there were no hard feelings afterward. Burton's willingness to be brutally honest with his wife saved Wallace from an incredibly uncomfortable conversation and kept the production moving forward. Fact 8. Dental fillings in the torture scene period films Live or Die by their attention to historical detail, but even the most lavish productions sometimes miss obvious anachronisms that eagle-eyed viewers catch years later. Anne of the Thousand Days features one particularly glaring mistake during one of its darkest and most intense scenes, where Thomas Cromwell orders the torture of Mark Smeaton, a musician in Anne Boleyn's household who was accused of having an affair with the Queen. The scene shows Smeaton being brutally tortured as Cromwell's men twist knotted rope into his temples, trying to force him to confess to adultery with Anne. The actor playing Smeaton delivers a convincing performance of agony and terror, screaming in pain as the torture continues, but his wide-open mouth reveals something that absolutely should not be there. When he screams, viewers can clearly see metal dental fillings in his teeth shining under the studio lights for anyone paying close attention. This creates a massive historical problem because metal dental fillings as we know them today simply did not exist in the 1530s when this scene takes place. Modern dental fillings made from metal amalgam weren't developed until the 1800s, roughly 300 years after Anne Boleyn's execution. During the Tudor period, dentistry was extremely primitive and mostly involved pulling out problem teeth rather than trying to save them with fillings. The appearance of 20th century dental work in a 16th century torture scene is the kind of continuity error that can completely break the historical illusion for viewers who notice it, turning a dramatic moment into an unintentional reminder that they're watching actors on a movie set rather than witnessing actual Tudor history. Fact 9. Catherine Howard's badge appears years early. The production designers of Anne of the Thousand Days went to enormous lengths to create authentic-looking Tudor interiors, but they made a significant historical mistake that reveals they were probably reusing set pieces from other productions or working from the wrong reference materials. Several scenes in the film show ornate wall paneling carved with heraldic badges, which was typical decoration for Tudor palaces and great houses. However, some of this paneling displays the personal badge of Catherine Howard, who was King Henry VIII's fifth wife, and this creates a serious timeline problem. The entire story of Anne of the Thousand Days takes place between 1525 and 1536, covering the period from when King Henry first became infatuated with Anne Boleyn through her eventual execution in May of 1536. Catherine Howard doesn't enter the picture until several years later, becoming Henry's wife in July of 1540, which was a full 4 years after Anne's death. This means Catherine Howard's heraldic badge had absolutely no business appearing on any wall in scenes depicting Anne Boleyn's time as queen. The mistake is particularly noticeable in scenes where Anne and young Princess Elizabeth are playing together shortly before Anne's arrest, and in another scene where Anne and Henry are arguing about the Act of Succession. These moments are supposed to be taking place in 1535 or 1536, yet the walls are decorated with symbols belonging to a woman who wouldn't become queen for another 4 or 5 years. It's the equivalent of seeing a portrait of a future president hanging in the White House years before they were even elected. And it suggests the set designers weren't paying close enough attention to which queen's decorations belonged in which time period. Fact 10. The same cannons, the same men, 3 years apart. Movie studios have always looked for ways to save money by reusing footage whenever possible. But Anne of the Thousand Days contains one of the most blatant examples of recycled shots in a major Hollywood production. The film includes 2 significant moments where cannons are fired to mark important royal occasions. First, during Anne Boleyn's wedding procession when she becomes Queen of England, and then 3 years later when cannons signal the announcement of her execution. These 2 events represent complete opposite ends of Anne's story, one celebrating her rise to power and the other marking her tragic death. Observant viewers who watch both scenes carefully will notice something very strange about the cannon shots because they are not just similar, they are completely identical. The production didn't film the cannons firing twice for these 2 different occasions. They simply used the exact same footage in both scenes. Every single detail matches perfectly between the wedding and the execution announcement, including all the men operating the cannons who stand in precisely the same positions in both shots. The soldiers in the foreground and background are doing exactly the same things, and even the way the smoke billows from the cannons is identical. There's even a particularly telling moment in the wedding procession where one of the men lighting the cannon fuse visibly flinches right before the explosion. And then, just moments later, in the same procession, the film cuts to another cannon shot that shows the exact same flinching man in the exact same position. The editors apparently decided to use that same piece of footage twice within a single scene, and then used it again for Anne's death announcement 3 years later in the story, making it some of the hardest working footage in the entire film. Fact 11. Anne miscounts her own days. The entire title of the film comes from a powerful moment near the end where Anne Boleyn, imprisoned in the Tower of London and awaiting her execution, sits alone in her cell calculating how long she has been Queen of England. This scene is meant to be deeply symbolic as Anne uses small wooden markers to physically count out the days of her reign, with each marker representing 100 days. The audience watches as she carefully places these markers down one by one, adding up the time from her marriage to King Henry through to her arrest and trial. According to the script and the film's title, Anne should be counting out approximately 1,000 days, which is roughly how long she actually served as queen before her execution in 1536. The historical Anne Boleyn was queen for exactly 1,085 days, from her marriage to her death, which equals about 2 years, 11 months, and 20 days. However, when viewers watch Anne counting in the film and actually pay attention to how many markers she places down, there's a noticeable problem with the math. Anne only puts down 9 wooden markers during this scene, and since each marker is supposed to represent 100 days, that means she's only counting 900 days total, not 1,000. The film is missing an entire marker, which means Anne is shortchanging her own reign by 100 days. Whether this was an oversight by the actress, a directorial choice that didn't quite work out, or simply a continuity error that nobody caught during editing, it's a strange mistake to make in a scene that's specifically designed to emphasize the exact number of days that gives the movie its title. Fact 12. A bobby pin in Tudor times. Creating a convincing period film requires incredibly careful attention to every detail of costume, hair, and makeup, because even the smallest modern element can completely destroy the historical illusion. The hair and makeup department on Anne of the Thousand Days worked hard to create authentic-looking Tudor hairstyles for all the characters, using techniques and tools that would have been available in the 1530s. However, they made one very visible mistake that somehow made it all the way through filming, editing, and post-production without anyone catching it. During a scene where Mary Boleyn, Anne's older sister, is having a conversation with her father, Thomas Boleyn, the camera provides a clear view of the actor playing Thomas from the side. If viewers look closely at his elaborately styled hair, they can spot a modern bobby pin holding one of his curls in place just in front of his left ear. The bobby pin is clearly visible against his hair and skin, sitting there as an unmistakable piece of 20th century technology in what's supposed to be a 16th century English manor house. Bobby pins as we know them today weren't invented until 1901, more than 350 years after the events depicted in this film. During the Tudor period, people who wanted to hold their hair in specific styles would have used ribbons, leather strips, or sometimes small wooden or bone pins, but certainly nothing resembling the mass-produced metal bobby pins that became common in the 20th century. The appearance of this anachronistic hair accessory is the kind of continuity error that makes viewers suddenly remember they're watching actors in costumes rather than actual historical figures, breaking the careful spell that the rest of the production worked so hard to create. Fact 13. Queen Elizabeth II's history lesson. Anne of the Thousand Days received one of the most unusual and prestigious compliments any historical film has ever gotten, and it came from someone who had a very personal connection to the story being told. The film was selected for a Royal Command performance in London, which is a special screening attended by members of the British royal family, and this particular screening was attended by Queen Elizabeth II herself. Royal Command performances are major events in the British film industry, and they give filmmakers a rare opportunity to present their work directly to the monarchy. After the screening ended, Queen Elizabeth II spoke with producer Hal Wallace about the film, and what she said to him was both gracious and slightly ironic. She thanked Wallace and told him, quote, "We're learning about English history from your films," end quote. This was an extraordinary statement coming from the Queen of England, especially considering that the film depicts events involving her own ancestors. Queen Elizabeth II is a direct descendant of King Henry VIII through his daughter Elizabeth I, who was the child born from Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn. The Queen's comment suggests she found the film both educational and well-made, which is high praise indeed from someone whose family history is literally the subject of the movie. It's worth noting that despite being a descendant of these historical figures, the modern royal family probably doesn't have detailed personal knowledge of every event from Tudor times, so historical films can genuinely offer new perspectives even to those with familial connections to the story. The fact that Queen Elizabeth II appreciated Wallace's portrayal of her ancestors' tragic story speaks to the film's quality and historical sensitivity. Fact 14. Burton loaned his coat to a comedy. Richard Burton's elaborate costumes from Anne of the Thousand Days were works of art in themselves, featuring rich fabrics, intricate embroidery, and ornamental designs that perfectly captured the opulence of King Henry VIII's court. After filming Wrapped, one of Burton's most impressive costumes ended up having a second life in a completely different kind of movie, and Burton himself was directly responsible for making this happen. Just 2 years after Anne of the Thousand Days was released, British comedian Sid James was cast to play King Henry VIII in Carry On Henry, which was part of the famous Carry On series of low-budget British comedy films that parodied everything from historical epics to horror movies. The Carry On films were known for their silly humor and ridiculous takes on serious subjects, and Carry On Henry was no exception, turning the story of Henry VIII and his wives into a broad comedy filled with jokes and slapstick humor. When it came time to costume Sid James for his role as the King, the production borrowed one of Richard Burton's actual costumes from Anne of the Thousand Days, and Burton personally agreed to loan out the coat he had worn in the serious historical drama. This meant that the same elegant coat that Burton wore while delivering dramatic speeches about love, power, and dynasty in a 10-time Oscar-nominated film was now being worn by a comedian making jokes and pratfalling his way through a parody. The costume recycling created an odd connection between these two very different interpretations of the same historical figure, with Burton's regal coat going from high drama to low comedy in just a couple of years, proving that in the movie business, even the most prestigious costumes can find themselves in unexpected places. Fact 15. Bejeweled, the only Oscar-nominated Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn has been one of the most frequently portrayed figures in film and television history, with dozens of actresses taking on the role of King Henry VIII's doomed second wife over the past century. Major productions have featured famous actresses like Merle Oberon in The Private Life of Henry VIII from 1933, Dorothy Tootin in the BBC series The Six Wives of Henry VIII from 1970, Natalie Dormer in the Showtime series The Tudors from 2007, and Natalie Portman in The Other Boleyn Girl from 2008. More recently, actresses like Claire Foy, Jodie Turner-Smith, and others have brought their own interpretations to this complex historical character. Despite all these performances spanning decades of cinema and television, Genevieve Bujold holds a distinction that no other Anne Boleyn actress has ever achieved. She remains the only actress in history to receive an Academy Award nomination for playing Anne Boleyn, earning a Best Actress nomination for Anne of the Thousand Days at the 1970 Oscars. This is particularly remarkable considering how many high-profile productions have tackled this story and how many talented actresses have portrayed Anne over the years, yet none of them have been recognized by the Academy for their performances. Bujold didn't win the Oscar that year. She lost to Maggie Smith for The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, but the nomination itself secured her place in film history. Her fierce, intelligent portrayal of Anne as a woman who refused to be merely a victim of circumstances set a standard that later actresses have been measured against. The fact that more than 50 years have passed since her nomination and no other Anne Boleyn performance has earned similar recognition from the Academy speaks to just how special and memorable Bujold's interpretation truly was.